My goodness, Mr. Bindleglass is joining us. Christy's with us. Dr. Bindleglass. So David, we've got Christy. I think they have quorum. I don't know if they're allowed to do that. I'm kidding. All right. Excellent. All right. So I think we are all here. Call to order this regular budget meeting of the Easton Board of Education at 7:30 p.m. on February 11th, 2021. All members in attendance. The first item on the agenda is our public comment. So for those who are interested in making public comment, please raise your hand using the participant window or flag us down in the video window. And we'll just give everybody an opportunity, and I'll ask for the aid of my fellow co-hosts to identify anyone who's trying to flag us down. Okay. Sorry, Carolyn, were you trying to? Yes. Very good. Thank you.
Hi, Carolyn Oppenheim, Hunting Ridge Road. I was listening to the last budget meeting, and one thing kind of started to concern me a little bit, and that was some of the board indicated or kind of talking about the fact that possibly the social worker wasn't a necessary item. There is a humongous, tremendous crisis going on in the schools. Kids are not well. And I hope, and they're going to take a while to come back from COVID, the related items for COVID. I mean, middle school sucks anyway, but coming back from COVID, and it's not been a trauma for everybody. It's not been a trauma for all my kids. But it's been a trauma for some. And coming back is going to be so tremendously difficult. And I'm going to tell you right now that the schools do not have enough resources to deal with what we have going on right now. It is going to only get worse going forward. I have concerns for a lot of reasons. And I think we probably need closer to 2 social workers to be joining the team rather than 1. But it's as relevant, I think, especially in the upcoming year, but I think in general, but especially in the upcoming year, as the class size and the media specialist. And it is, for a lot of families, it is on par. And I don't know that it's said enough as some of the other things, and it's as important to many, but to the possible few that you might prevent something from happening, it's going to be incredibly important. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Carolyn. Any additional public comment? All right, that takes us to board member comment. Okay. All right. And then that takes us to discussion and possible action, and we're into the 2021-2022 budget. I will turn it over to Dr. Harrison to lead us in our efforts.
Good evening, everyone. So what I'd like to do tonight is just take some time and walk us through sort of where we left off with our last conversation, things that we want to accomplish tonight. But I want to begin with just thinking about the kind of taking a step back just for a moment, looking at the bigger picture of the budget. And what I like to think of as the 2 major components, and that is looking at revenue and expenditures. So the majority of our conversations so far have been really focused on expenditures, which makes sense because it's not like typically in education we see a lot of revenue. But I did want to just take some time for the public who's watching, and a lot of times if it's you're a community member, it's your first time kind of going through this budget process with us, I think it's kind of good to just spell some things out and be really clear. So when we're looking at revenue, we're really talking about revenue sources coming from three different sort of buckets of money. That's the federal, the state, and the local. And so if you think about the size of the federal government, the size of the state government, the size of the local government, it would make sense then that the slices of this pie would then mirror that, but you will find exactly the opposite. So I just want to walk through kind of those three buckets of money and just talk about how they come into the district and how they're typically allocated. The first is federal funds. And so when I am using this, these revenue sources, I'm looking at our current year, the year that we're living in, so fiscal year 21, looking at those revenue sources, just as a comparison to give us a picture of what to expect in the future. So federal funds, we received just under $250,000 in federal funds last year, and they're broken out into these title grants. I hesitate to use the word grants because grants often sound like it's just money that you, competitive money that you apply for from a separate entity or a business that's not necessarily renewable. Title grants are a little bit different coming from the federal government. So we often hear a lot about Title I funds. We receive just about $25,000 in Title I funds that's really focused on improving the education of disadvantaged students. The federal government determines that how to calculate how many disadvantaged students you have in a district. It's determined by free and reduced lunch status. When that number overall is below 40% for any one school or any one district, then it's allocated by the number of students versus if your number is well over that, it is then allocated, you have a Title I school versus having Title I students. So just from an historical standpoint, we've talked about this a little bit in central office. I was a principal at a middle school that was a Title I middle school, about 850 students, and I received $400,000 a year in Title I funds alone. Our Title I numbers, we were about 98% free and reduced lunch. So you can see the comparison. Our Title I numbers are very low in our district, which means that the funding is also low. Title II funds are focused on preparing, training, and recruiting high quality teachers. Currently in Easton, we receive just under $14,000 annually. And so this is really focused on teacher training. Historically, our focus has been to use these funds for training for new teachers, team training, all of those pieces, the components of that state training is really coming from those Title II funds. Title III funds are dedicated for improving language proficiency for our English learners. What historically we've talked about as English as a second language, or students who English is not their native language. And you could see with a small number of just over $3,000, it's not a lot of money. It does help to offset some of the resources that might be needed in districts where they have higher number of English learners. These funds could be used to fund a teacher or staff members. We have about 25 students, English learners at Samuel Staples, which is higher than it has been historically. But again, you can see there that that's not a huge amount of money. Title IV funds, and we get just over $7,700. They're designated to promote well-rounded education and safe and healthy students. And so these funds could be used for things like if there's like an art program that we want to do that we could focus on well-rounded. Oftentimes we have used these funds for things like restorative practices training or things around social emotional safety, kind of bringing people in or bringing in some resources for students. And again, it's a fairly small amount of money. The bulk of our federal funds that come in are Title VI funds, and it's IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And those are funds that are specifically targeted towards providing free and appropriate public education for all of our students with IEPs. So this is really a big chunk of funding for that goes directly to SPED. In our grants in our district, just like most districts, a huge portion of these funds, it's either for resources for SPED students, but primarily it is to offset the cost of some SPED staff. And then the last is, you see also Title VI, but this portion of the Title VI funds are focused on pre-K or preschool, and it's really a focus on early learning, and that's about $3,362. The thing that you hear often when you're talking about federal funding is that these funds are to supplement and not supplant. So that's real education speak, but really the easy way to think about it is supplementing is where you have something already there and you're building onto it, and supplanting would be replacing. So we could supplement our our program for our English learners by bringing in some new software, but we couldn't supplant it by taking all of the resources that we would use for English learners out of our operating budget and then just replacing it with these funds. So it's a good time for us to talk about these funds because of COVID, there are some new funds that have been released to districts. I'll talk about those in a second. But I just make a note there at the bottom, although federal funds are a source of revenue, they're not used for typical general fund expenditures. So, you know, you would see that while there are some things associated with Title I funds, and I think in Easton right now, the bulk of that money, or maybe even the whole thing, is a paraprofessional to work with our students in support in math, and that switched back and forth. That funding annually goes back and forth between Staples and Helen Keller to share the load of that. And you'll see that when it's applied towards a position, you'll see it historically in our the budget binders that you get, where it shows as an offset, so that you can see the salaries that are dedicated to those funds. These federal grants or federal funds are reported annually. And so this is a report that went to the Board of Finance last year. I just kind of took a screenshot of it so that you can see that we're showing our special ed IDA grant, which is also known as that Title VI grant, and how that's been applied annually. You'll see that the funding for the most part is pretty stable. I'll show you that in this next slide as well. This funding comes to us it's available to us in 2-year blocks. So for instance, our total federal funding that we got in 2016 was available to us 16 to 18. And you'll see that that was roughly $259,000. Then in 2017, we get another grant. So there's a year of overlap. And that really helps with the planning of how to use those federal funds over time. But you'll see for the most part, it's not a huge delta from year to year. That these numbers are specifically driven by the number of SPED students that we have enrolled And so there's a December 1 headcount that's used to generate the amount of federal funding that we get related to IDEA. Is same thing, we have to report annually on the number of English learners that we have, and that's how that money comes to us. It doesn't come directly to us from the feds. It comes through the state as a pass-through agency. The state is able to hold a percentage of the block grant that comes to the state of Connecticut for administrative costs, and then the rest is passed on to us. So you'll see that we are kind of started off this year with the remainder of that 2018 to 2020 grant. And then last year we received the 2019 to 2021 grant. Well, what happened at the end of last school year, 2020, COVID happened. And so many districts were scrambling to figure out how are we going to spend down the rest of these federal funds, because if you don't spend them, you end up having to write a check back to the state. The state gives that money back to the feds. And so it's important to spend that money, obviously, on the students that you have present in the building at the time. So the state allowed us to take that 2018, 2020 grant and extend it through 2021, so that those funds didn't expire and we had to give those back. In the meantime, we got the 1921 grant. And then I have listed as TBA this next block grant that will take us across the next 2 years, because the money comes in at different times during the year. So we don't have the total amount. I think that at last check, we were still waiting for the final grant award amount for Title III and Title IV. And so it's important to understand kind of how those grants work, or those federal funds work for us, because now with COVID, there's some new grant funding that we've talked about already, but I just want to, I think it's a good time to come back to it and talk about all of these COVID related grants, because there's one that we're anticipating that was just recently announced. So we received already this year the ESSER 1 grant, and that is, I wanted to remember the acronym for ESSER and I completely lost it. But the R is for relief, which is the most important part. And so it's the federal government saying, we understand that there's been a hardship on school districts based on COVID and the expenses. And so here is those two ESSER grants were huge pots of money that went to the state, and then they allocated it to districts. They for ESSER 1 and ESSER 2, they were allocated to our district based on our Title I enrollment, or our Title I students. So you'll see that there are some districts that are more urban districts that got, a couple of $1 million in ESSER 2 funds because of the number of economically disadvantaged students that are enrolled in that district. Thank you. Elementary and Secondary Emergency Relief Fund. Thanks to my fact checkers who are sending me messages. I appreciate you. And then there's the COVID relief funds, and that's $87,302. And I remember Scott talking about those funds earlier in the year. You'll recall that when we've been reporting, doing the financial reports monthly, we've been putting all of our COVID expenses in the maintenance line, so that then that could be reimbursed to that line from these federal grants. The guidelines that the state always pushes for all federal grants that are 2-year grants are, they encourage you to do the majority of the spending in year 1. so that you are not at risk at having to give those funds back if you don't spend in time. It's not a set law or a set rule. It's just their guidance. Historically, our district has been spending more in the second year of the grant. But the good news is we don't have a history of giving money back. So we're still making sure that we're making good use of those funds. The ESSER 2 funds have not been released to us yet. We've just been notified about them over the last couple of weeks. I think I mentioned that this is part of a $494 million federal grant to the state, and our cut of it is this $122,000. There are 4 areas that we could spend that money on. And you'll recall on Tuesday, one of the things that I shared was that that these budget conversations were focusing on our operating budget, and this ESSER 2 money is really helping us to think about our recovery. So really focused on COVID recovery and short term. So these funds will be available a little bit longer than the typical 2-year grant. They'll be available to us until fall of 2023, which I guess is 2 years, but it'll be almost just a little bit over a half year of additional time. And again, the same logic applies to these with that they're meant to supplement and not supplant, which is really important, I think, as these grants are becoming more and more discussed in the public and in the news, that we don't want community members to think like, oh, great, this is a way for us to chop $122,000 out of our operating budget, because it really is just focused on recovery, just for a short amount of time, and very much about supplementing and not supplanting. The 4 areas that we are able to spend, these CSDE guidelines, are based on our state priorities that they shared with us in the spring when we got our first allocation of COVID relief money. And that is focusing on academic supports, learning loss, acceleration, and recovery. So you can see all of the as we're analyzing our data and thinking about the academic learning loss that we need to address, that money makes perfect sense. Family and community connections, school safety and social and emotional well-being of the whole student and of our school staff. I think that end of our school staff is a real understanding from the state that COVID is not just having a significant impact on our students, but also our staff, and being able to use those funds for that. And then some of the more practical things around remote learning, staff development, and the digital divide. And so this opens up the door for us to use these funds for technology purchases as well, to kind of make up the gap. So I have 1.47% of our total revenue sources comes from the federal government. From state funds, it's 1.54%, which is even less. This is a significant piece to note. In my previous district, this was 28% of the overall revenue. Our state education cost sharing formula does not benefit towns where they calculate our wealth rank as high, and it puts a lot more of the education burden on the community. This is something that we recognize, and it's, for me, the reason why it's just really important to be very frugal and very thoughtful about how we're spending this money. So from our education cost sharing, this is based on last year's numbers. We received about $172,000. That in the same way that the federal money goes to the state as a pass-through, the ECS, Education Cost Sharing Grant, goes to the town as a pass-through and then ends up in our general fund for us to spend along with our operating budget. The estimated excess cost funding is specifically related to our students with IEPs. And so we've heard this before, that if the cost of educating a student with a disability is 4.5 times the cost of our per pupil expenditure, then we can start to qualify for some reimbursement funds from the state. So it looks like we received just under $90,000 last year in excess cost funds. And again, to put this in perspective, this is a challenge for us because our per pupil expenditure is high. Then it takes a lot of spending in order for us to start qualifying for the reimbursements from the state. There is some, there are a number of bills that are in front of the legislature, really pushing for some change here. I would encourage board members and community members, if you have time, to take a look at that and really advocate for that, because in our districts, this would be really impactful from a financial standpoint if we could see some change here. In a previous district that is just a little bit larger than our district, this line, I had about $900,000 in excess cost share. And so you can see it's not a lot. And so again, for every dollar that doesn't come from the state or doesn't come from the feds, it comes from local money. And it's something that we are always aware of. There's a new ECS formula for education cost sharing that was adopted just a few years ago. They are trying to rework some of the spending for districts that got cut significantly. Easton happens to not be on the list where we could anticipate seeing significant change going forward. And then the last area of funding comes obviously from our local funds. And so in looking at what that breakdown was across for last year, that was $16.5 million as a total piece of that $17 million budget, because so little of it comes from the state and then comes from the federal government. This is where our local revenue is funded, obviously through our local taxes, and that comes to us in order to be appropriated for our general fund and our operating budget. So tonight, I could stop and see if there are any questions on just the revenue. I know that might be different for how we typically talk about it. I was sharing with Clarence earlier that I've always taken this approach with revenue and expenditures, because as a person who doesn't, I don't live in Excel spreadsheets all day long. I think about this whole budgeting process the way that I would my own personal budget at home, right? So we know what our salaries are, we know what our expenditures are, we can anticipate what some budget drivers would be, and try to plan ahead, which is ultimately a very similar approach that we take with school budgeting. Any questions on the revenue?
Jeff?
Right, thank you very much for this presentation. It certainly shed an awful lot of light on money and grants, and from both the Fed and the state. On the ESSER grants, you talked. I wasn't quite sure if some of those monies could be put toward staffing, and I'm thinking in particular about the social worker, and whether that would be something that we could tap into to help meet that need.
Jeff, that's a great question. We actually talked about that some. Here's my hesitation with doing that, because So while all of those other federal funds are recurring, we know that this ESSER fund is going to expire. And so the question is, do we think that the social emotional needs that are present in our students are just COVID related and will not continue? Then if so, then that would be a really good use of that money, because we know that we're not needing to make a longer term commitment. I would argue that it is likely that those are needs that we'll continue to have beyond that. So then the question is, could you use them? We could consider using a portion of those funds to partially fund that position, recognizing that it will eventually end up in our operating budget going forward. So it could be a way to sort of work our way to that point. I think that that's something that we could be open to talking to. But we also are still in the data analysis portion of this to really be able to see what's the academic loss that we might need to focus on as well. Because I do think that when it comes to the academic challenges versus the social and emotional challenges, I think that the academic ones could be more of a shorter duration, where the social and emotional, we've already been on this shift to our students having more social emotional needs prior to COVID. So my gut tells me that might be enduring, but that's something that I think that we can look at.
Okay, well, I asked because several years ago, when we decided to take on the project Lead the Way, ELF was wonderful as our partner and gave us well over $100,000 to build the room, to buy the hardware, to buy the software, and to provide training for the teacher, so that we could launch this very important program for our kids, with the understanding that after all of that was done, that we would be responsible for the not only the teacher but the teacher's additional training that would come up in years to come. So I'm looking at the ESSER thing or the ESSER opportunity, and saying this is something that I think we hopefully would be able to use to help us get through these very difficult times, with the understanding that if those times continued, that it would be the board's responsibility to carry it forward.
Yeah, and that's a good point. I think that so that's a really great example of how that, how you can seed a program and then eventually sort of take it on as part of the operating budget. That really makes sense. Actually, Sue and I had some discussion about that. The one piece that I would be cautious about, just because we're talking specifically about a position, is when we're talking about that social work position, and we'll get to that in a few minutes, but when we're talking about that position, we would be taking a half-time social worker and making them whole, with the hope that the other half of their income, which is happening in a different district, that they would be willing to commit to us full-time. I wouldn't want to have them commit to us full-time unless we could really ensure, and of course we know things happen, but with some kind of real commitment, be able to communicate that we're not going to leave.
Sure, I understand that. Sure. Mm-hmm.
Any other questions on revenue?
One just quick, sort of following up on what Jeff made, and I know Jenny has her hand up twice now, so I apologize, but you think you could provide a list of things that you guys would recommend that these funds, the ESSER2, would go into either this fiscal year or next fiscal year? We shouldn't be telling you guys probably where it should go. You guys should tell us.
Yeah, well, so thanks. That's helpful. That is really what we want to do. And so it really is. So the timing of this is perfect because we're in the middle of the budget season. But the challenge is that we're in the middle of budget season, and so much of our energy is focused on the operating budget for next year. That this recovery plan, we just need to carve out some time to work with our principals on laying out what that looks like. But we have some ideas, Randy. I don't think that there'll be any concern of whether or not we could spend it. And it's nice that we won't, we're not talking about PPE here, or, we're not talking about barriers and plexiglass. We were able to use other funds for prior to these ESSER funds. But we've already been spending down the coronavirus relief fund and the ESSER 1 funds throughout the school year. Jenny?
Okay.
Thanks, Rita. I had the same thought with that Jeff mentioned as far as using it towards part of the social worker, but I'm glad to hear the little bit more detail about the specific individual who's in that position, for us to keep that in mind. I think we would really have to commit as a board to prioritizing that the following year. I think my question is more big picture. Just my initial question was about cost sharing versus the federal money, but I think you kind of answered it in that second slide. With the overall budget that you've presented to us, so just more of kind of a big picture theoretical understanding. So we're basically saying that it costs, the total amount that it costs to run our schools is the budget that you've presented to us in addition to that federal money, but we just don't really talk about and look at the federal expenditure when we're looking at the budget for next year. Like, yeah, it's necessary. Like, without it, you would have to add on even additional money to what we're spending.
Correct. And so, there's a couple of philosophies in the way that you approach how do you talk about these federal funds. Do the expenditures sit inside the general the operating budget with offsets, which is the way that we do positions? So I was looking through the binder from last year or the year that we're living in, and was able to see some positions listed 111, and then it would say idea grant offset. So that's one philosophy to have in there. A way that to me is sometimes cleaner is to just have all of those federal grants pulled completely out, and then it sort of runs side by side so that there's no confusion about where, what's paying for what. Mm-hmm. And then that would just mean that, as we're going through our, our annual budget process, that we would have some clear laid out reports on our Fund 2 expenditures or all of these federal grants. So right now, most of our title grants, except for the Title I, which is that I mentioned was for the staffing with the I think it's math paras, and Title VI, the IDA grant. The majority of those funds sit outside of our operating budget, and they're small amounts. I mean, so what you don't see in our operating budget is all of the resources that would normally be going towards new teacher training or new teacher induction, because that is coming from that title grant. So for the purposes of what we've presented to you as our operating budget for next year, it's really all coming from our general fund expenditures, unless it's otherwise notified that says that it's an offset.
Okay, I think I'm with you. So, but like you mentioned in previous binders, those deductions were shown, and I know that in previous budget cycles we've seen special ed costs and then the excess cost sharing monies, that number, it, has been sort of explained to us, the amount that we're getting this year versus last year, et cetera, and how that impacts the budget. So apologies, I'm sure I could flip the pages and figure it out, but so are we seeing that, or have you pulled that out as well? Like, are we not seeing that particular offset?
That's a great question. And I'm going to ask Clarence to jump in and correct me if I'm wrong. I'm almost positive that our estimated offset for excess costs, so what we anticipate getting for excess costs, I think that we have a plug number as an offset in our proposed budget. Clarence?
That is correct. If you go to function, I think it's 1201 or maybe 1211. It'll see excess costs offset. But some of the to Jenny's other question, some of those things they're definitely plug numbers. We won't know the number until probably later on in March. The state sets the number in March. So if you got it in the past, you probably got it later on in the budget process. Not in February. You got it probably in March.
Mm-hmm. And then my only other question, just in thinking about this sort of different way of approaching it, our Board of Finance will, excuse me, often is sort of focused on a head count, and looking at how many individuals, and is it up from last year? Is it down from last year? How is it relative to the total population? Is this going to make things appear different than they are? Do you know what I'm saying? If they're not seeing,
yep. That's a great
federal
question.
How is that going to affect their ability to clearly see the increases and decreases in the total number of bodies in the building?
So I had a great conversation today with Vicky in talking about we didn't call it the Parker report. It was the pre-Parker.
No.
It's the Hansen report.
The Hansen report, right. So she walked me through it. And so what we deliver to the Board of Finance. So we have, like I showed earlier, we have a report on those federal funds, but then we also have the total head count, which includes those people who are paid out of that federal fund. For the sake of keeping things consistent and comparable, I would want to do it the same way. I just want to confirm that that as part of what we're reporting when we talk about that head count is that we're able to that we're indicating if that is a salary that is not hitting the general fund, but instead being paid from the federal grant.
Yeah, that sounds great. Just something like a simple color code to indicate which ones are part of that. Okay.
And Jenny, my gut tells me that it's probably noted there in some way already. Mm-hmm. I just need to go back and look at it.
Okay, thank you.
So forging ahead, talking through the expenditures, what I wanted to do was just start with, here are the things that we've already addressed and sort of here's where we are. Clarence has a version of this working. So tonight, as any kind of additional reductions come up, he could plug those right in and we could keep rolling with having a real clear number. But just as a reminder, so we talked about the staff tuition reimbursement reductions at Keller and at Staples. We talked about the Envisions math program. That's the new math program, getting a better understanding of what that actual number is. We had the capital request reduction that we talked about on Tuesday, the $10,000 reduction towards roof repair. We took the basis BT out of the proposed budget for just under $30,000, and then that $145,000 for those outplacements that were not yet finalized. So that's where we landed.
Vidal, may I make a clarifying point?
Sure.
You've got the tuition reimbursements as a negative. You're going to show negatives for the other things. Those need to be positive. Those are payments we receive from staff. So they should be opposite from the other ones.
Thank you. So Thank you. Because when I was working off your spreadsheet, I just was like, I don't understand what. So I will go back and fix that. Thanks.
So if we're showing expenditures, when we receive cash, that comes as the opposite. So that's why it looked probably different to you.
Yes. Yes. So the things that we'll talk about tonight, we'll talk about human resources and staffing. We're going to talk about the technology purchases. We'll talk about C&I, and then Clarence has just a couple of notes for us about utilities and electricity. Those were the areas that we wanted to cover tonight. The only thing that I don't have is the Hanson Parker reports. And it's just early, and talking with Vicki about plugging in those new numbers. We wanted to wait until we settled out on some of the staffing so that we could have something that's a little bit more finalized. So forging forward, we talked last time about these proposed positions. We prioritized them, the 4th grade media specialist, and then that social worker. The additional considerations that we had not spoken about to date were the extracurricular stipends and the PE paraprofessional. And so with that, I've asked Sue if she would talk to us about those 2 areas. Sue?
Yes, I'm going to share my screen as soon as you, yep, thanks. So I'd start off right now by just, Randy had asked the other night if I would give a little overview about extracurriculars and participation rates and so forth. So if you would indulge me, just let me get through what I have for you tonight. So the total cost, I'm just moving around all these bars to get out of my vision. So the costs for all the stipends in the budget the next year is $46,013. That would be for 16 activities that are available as stipends for teachers in their contract. Right now, currently the 5th, 6th, and 7th grade students of this year would be our students at Keller next year, plus or minus move-ins or people who leave or move out. And that would be 305 students. This is a list of the range of activities that are already in the budget that amount to that $46,000. Just give you a minute to look at that. And then in 18-19, which was the last full year we had of students in the building doing all our extracurricular activities, these are the participation rates. These are the number of students next to the name of each of the clubs. The only club that did not run in that particular year was our volleyball club, because that was the year of the flood in the gymnasium. So the gymnasium was unavailable, and that typically was a well-subscribed club. I'm going to show you the year prior to this so you can see that as well. But typically in that club would run like 60 students, and it was oversubscribed. There usually was a waiting list as well. High demand on that club. Participation, therefore, in the year that I just showed you, by grade and then overall, was about 70% of the total students had participated in one or more of the activities that we ran. In 8th grade, in 6th grade, the participation rate was 57%. It went up in 7th grade, and 8th grade is that wonderful year of pancake breakfast, spaghetti dinner, big draws, kids cook and serve the meals, an incredible activity for them that ran on for 40 plus years in a row. So 235 of our 336 students that year participated in at least one activity. In the year prior to that, where we did have, for example, the volleyball club running, because we had the gym floor and so forth. I calculated out the percentages then that year was a little bit higher, 74%, just for your information. I also, you may recall, did a survey of other school systems that I had connections with through my the Tri-State Middle School Principals groups. So it's predominantly school systems like ours in the Tri-State area. And with the exception of one, which was Wilton, who charged a $25 flat fee per student, regardless of how many number of activities they chose, everyone else had their opportunities for extracurriculars fully in the budget. So then Randy brought up, and others brought up, and we have discussed this before, about a pay to participate option. So what I've done here is, if we come back next year, full in, the pandemic is over, and I take a percentage of 70% of the kids, which is kind of typical to the prior years, and divide, so I have a total of 305 students. This is the number I'm basing it on. 70% of that would be 214 students. I divided that into the total cost for extracurricular, and the fee per student would be $250 to be able to run all of our activities. There would be an additional cost out of pocket for families if some of the activities involved hiring a bus to go, for example, for a math competition or to a track with other middle schools. So I offer these things for the board to consider for further discussion on extracurricular activities, which would be the equity of a pay to participate program at a middle school level. As you saw in the previous slide, there's not comparable schools like ours and districts like ours that do charge a pay to participate at the middle school level. And there was just that one school, that one district in Wilton, where they had this $25 fee. I have spoken in previous years, and I believe it warrants repeating the important developmental benefits of students at middle school who are trying to figure out who their friends are, go between friends groups, and these extracurricular activities helps them to find like-minded students who have similar interests. It's a social activity, and it's very, very key to the development of students at a middle school level. The increased post-COVID need for school connectedness, again, just tells me with every fiber in my being that extracurriculars are a must-have for our students next year. And research that I have shared in the past too shows that extracurricular activities and student involvement and their connectiveness to school and to their teachers who run the activities is critical for their academic growth as well. Kids who are involved in schools do better academically. And that is, there's actually a research paper that I read on that. That's what I have for you in terms of the background, and answer any questions that you have or open it up for your discussion, of course.
Any questions for Sue? Randy?
Sue, can I just,
sorry. Go ahead, Jenny. I'm sorry.
is any of this, and there's sort of a rolling student activities, not rolling, but there's an account, correct? You know, like a student activities account. And aren't just some monies are in there from 8th grade or from if there's a play or a show or something? Is that,
Right,
does that offset this amount, or it just kind of rolls into the next year?
So those funds are used for different things. For example, so I don't have that information here for you tonight about what those account funds are, but they are used, for example, for designated things. So example, if the 8th grade government made $600 at the pancake breakfast, that money was deposited into the student activities account, which then the 8th grade government then used for end of year activities for the students. So that's the flow of that. For our play, we certainly have some money specific to that, because there's a lot of cost associated with getting the play up and running.
Mhm.
And then when the ticket sales come in, that usually replenishes the money that was spent. So, because you have to have some money on hand to get that going.
Right. It's honestly, it's more just sort of for kind of public refresher, you know, that money is necessary. It's kind of like a foundation that keeps things going, and it's not
Correct.
necessarily something to turn to try to defray this cost.
Mhm. And it has specific buckets for
Mhm.
specific grades and specific activities.
I know this, you don't have a crystal ball and can't say for sure. Do you have any anticipation, or has there ever been any kind of polling of families or parents about how any kind of pay to play might affect participation?
I personally don't have my finger on that pulse. In my feeling as a public education, everyone's paying taxes to support the schools, and this is kind of a tax on a tax, so to speak, to do a pay for play. And I worry about the equity for families who. I spoke with the town social worker last year when we were going into COVID, and a lot of families were in dire straits. And she was speaking to me because she was aware of people in need who would not want to come forward and ask for help.
Mhm.
And so, you know, the town had some available funds or gift cards or something, even to get people food. But people are too proud to ask. And so I'm aware of, you know, the number of students in free and reduced lunch, but we don't always get requests. Only if they make themselves available to me am I allowed to say, yes, I'll help you out. You know, we have a discretionary, I can help with that. But if they don't, they may not just send their child to this activity because they can't afford it.
And the amount that struck me was just to think if you have a set of twins, or, you know, two kids in the school at the same time, and, you know, it's not just $200, then it's double or triple that amount. Yeah, it makes a difference.
Absolutely.
I think Gretchen and then Devin.
I always give a plug for this. I know that Sue always talks about the middle school kids as being social beings. I think that these extracurricular activities, one thing that's so amazing about them is that the kids not only get a chance to engage with each other, but they also see these educators in a different way and get to interact with them in, you know, in a different way. At a time when they are feeling awkward and weird, you know, and maybe math isn't their best subject, but maybe the math teacher, you know, is able to engage with them in some other way. It's just so important. The media center is so important at that age. You know, some of these kids are also trying sports for the first time or trying musical instruments for the first time in such a safe and compassionate way. I am a huge proponent for them being allowed and able to try all these different things in such a safe environment.
Gretchen, to your point, my very favorite thing to see is the school play. In the school play, it's multi-grade. Whoever wants to come out and be part of it is always part of it. And then I always sit in the back, and my jaw drops when I see a shy child who I've seen in classes who doesn't raise their hand. They're very introverted, and then they get up on the stage and they belt out a song, and you know how you feel when you see this. And I've seen it, and then those kids in multi-grades now have a friend in that little sixth grader has a friend in seventh and eighth grade, with a very strong connection. And you're right. I've also thought about, and I heard about my colleague principals who can't offer, there's certain towns where they take over the athletics through their park and rec and so forth. And I hesitate to even bring this up because of that connection that the kids get with the teachers, as you well know, Gretchen. And kids blossom through these. There's no doubt about that. It helps them during a hard time to be a kid.
Devin?
Yeah, I would just say, especially coming off of a COVID year where kids have been so disconnected and in many ways just disenfranchised from school, this is an opportunity to keep them invested coming to class. The research is pretty clear too, that if you can keep kids invested in school, they're not going to drop out. They're going to do better. You shared it, do better academically. And it's going to, it serves the town for our kids to be involved, after school, to be invested and to potentially, again, stay involved when they go to high school. It's a great thing for our community. It pays the town back in dividends. And the numbers also are really, really helpful seeing that many kids participate. And I bet it goes up next year.
And I always at open house have always said to parents, sit down with your child, pick one during the whole course of the year that should be something that you encourage your child to do at least one activity over the course of a year in middle school.
Yeah, and I will also say on the equity side, I think this is important because I think it's such a really valuable point that the students who are, disproportionately hurt by COVID, disproportionately hurt academically, social emotionally, are kids who are also struggling, in families who are potentially struggling economically. So to take away things that they can participate in equitably with their friends is just another way to single them out in a way that makes them feel different. And kids at that age know. And I think it's important that, we have the opportunity to support our, community and support our families, that, this is one way that we can do that. And schools are a way that we can support families who are struggling without anybody knowing it's happening, without singling out any children.
Thank you. Randy?
Sure. I mean, listen, I don't think anybody's advocating we get rid of these. I think it's just a matter of weighing the other $1 million in the budget that we're trying to figure out how to pay for. And I guess I'll look at the play again, because I think Jenny brought it up. There's about 11,000 here for the play. My understanding was that there's already funds in excess of 11,000 at Helen Keller that you could apply to get the play started and then recoup that money on the ticket sales, but maybe I'm misunderstanding that.
I'm not sure what $11,000 you're referring to.
The play director, play musical director, play producer.
Oh, the stipends. Those are the stipends. Yes.
Right.
So I think Randy, your question is if there are stipends for the play and there's money in the student activities account, is that your point?
Well, I guess where do the ticket sales dollars from the ticket sales go? Maybe I'm missing.
They go into our student activities account to replenish the money that went out to produce the play that year.
And
so there's a balance. Yeah, there's a balance that we maintain there based on, and we've brought it down over the years. There's a balance that we maintain there to make sure that we have enough money for the director to get what they need, scenery, costumes, things of that nature, to produce the play. And then the ticket sales help to replenish it, to leave that same balance there for the next year's play.
Okay, I got you. Okay, all right.
Yeah, I think there are startup costs in addition to into the salaries. Like they even have to purchase the rights to whatever play they're interested in doing, and depending on the title, some are more expensive than others. And a lot of things that I would imagine need to be ordered in advance of when the play is going to be put on.
Right, costumes, etc.
The only other question I have from the other night, and I'm not sure that's relevant, but the ski club, Sue, how many people participate in the ski club, and what is that?
So the ski club is not a Helen Keller middle school activity. It was a PTA and then O run activity. It was not something that we didn't do anything. That was not a school function. So that was organized, staffed. They rented the buses. They collected the money from the families and went skiing 3 or 4 times over the course of the winter. On a Friday evening.
Any additional questions for Sue? Jeff?
So Sue, the balance in the student activity account is what, $20,000? $15,000?
Jeff, I wasn't prepared to talk about student activity account tonight. I can get you that information for the next time, but we have drawn it down. I have old information.
Well, I
You know,
know, I know once upon a time we had a fairly substantial balance that was carried over year to year, and that was primarily because the cost of the plays, which used to be pretty substantial, it wouldn't be unusual to have a $10,000 bill between costumes and buying the rights and all that stuff. Now that over the last 3 or 4 years has changed, and the cost of putting on the production is not anywhere near what it used to be. So it led to the profits going back into the student activity account, and then obviously raising the balance. Now, I think it was 2 years ago or maybe 3, we had the discussion about could some of those funds be used to help to fund this particular line item in the budget. And I think actually you did that, if I remember correctly.
yeah, we did. We talked. I remember talking about it in previous years, and I also my memory and my experience in the school at this point, there were different phases of who was producing the play.
Yeah.
And we, at one point it was faculty run, at another point it became parent volunteer run, and depending on, and then it became, you recall we hired Diana Canova,
Right.
who is is an actress, a former actress, so she's in theater. And so the cost per year fluctuated wildly,
Sure.
depending on who was available to do it. Diana Canova, who ran the tightest financial play, ship, because she did things very modestly.
Mhm.
She just she's not available. She's no longer available to do this with us. So when we come back, she's already told us, even prior to last year, that she was out of the business.
Okay.
So she's not available. And for when we do get back in and are able to produce all the activities for the kids and have a play, I'm going to be seeking again to find a faculty advisor or somebody else. So
Yeah.
I don't know what it's going to look like.
Well, you have a very talented assistant principal who used to be the director and one of the architects of those plays, and man, they were great. So
I keep her pretty busy now, and sort of her kids at home. So I don't believe she's going to be able to do that again.
well, I don't know if there's $11,000, maybe she could afford to hire a nanny or something for the kids during play practice. Anyway, that's thank you. Thank
Jeff,
you for that. And for anybody that has any question about this, in terms of student activities, I don't know that there is a more important thing than being able to provide kids with extracurricular activities. I've once heard someone describe middle schoolers as hormones in sneakers, and so they're going through an awful lot, and to be able to connect with maybe people they don't know, or connect with friends that are going to introduce them to more friends, makes them feel a part of the school community, and that's how you get great schools.
I just want to add one little final thing to close out this conversation, and then Sue could talk to us about the PE para. It could be a slippery slope if you to use student activity funds to pay teacher stipends. So if you think about the generation of the student activity funds coming from ticket sales and those pieces, then being funneled into the general fund and expended to teachers as part of their stipends, it's a slippery slope. And it would be something that I know we're not, that we're not proposing that as a solution, but just as something to think about just going forward. It's
Yeah, I wasn't advocating that.
Yeah.
I tried to make that, funny. Maybe I didn't, but
oh,
that was my intent.
just in case there's somebody listening in that's like, oh, that's perfect, and that's exactly what we'll do. I don't want us to all end up on the news. Not for that.
Sue, I'm sorry I brought it up. I meant it to be a positive thing. Now, forget it. Stop talking about this one.
PE paraprofessional.
Okay, thank you. So, you may recall, you may not recall. Let me just tell you the way it is. Prior to 2017, in the 16-17 school year, we had, and years prior, we had 3 PE/health teachers on staff. 2 of them would always be in the gymnasium at the same time. And one of them would be teaching health at that same time, and they would rotate based on courses in the health and whatever. So between 3 people, there was always 2 down there and 1 upstairs in a classroom. In 2017, we cut a position. We went down to just 2 people. And at that time, I had put in a request to have a PE para, another adult down with the certified teacher in the gymnasium, now that there was 1 person, for safety and student supervision. And I can explain in detail why that was necessary. So we did have a PE para for 2 years. The para certainly couldn't perform the same duties as a second certified teacher, but did serve the purpose that we needed. So if you'll just give me a few minutes. In our gymnasium, it's a beautiful gymnasium now, and there's locker rooms outside of it. So boys go into one locker room, girls into another, and they change for gym. This year, that's not happening. We've closed the locker rooms this year, and so this is not an issue this year. But when we come back post-COVID, once again, children in middle school change for PE and change back out before they go up to their classes. So we had 1 person in the hallway by the locker room listening for any unusual sounds in the locker rooms and being able to help children who are having a little difficulty in there. And then 1 person in the gymnasium, so that as students came out of the locker room, there was supervision in the gymnasium, and that was necessary. Middle school, I love being in middle school, but you have to watch and supervise. So the PE para and the gymnasium and the PE teacher were able to handle that beautifully. In 1920, that was cut. That para position was cut out of our budget. So we had 1 year without the PE para, and as a result, I have information from the PE teachers of what adjustments had to be made without a paraprofessional. So let me just go through this briefly with you, or not briefly. You can ask as many questions as you like. So our outdoor activities are all the way down the hill. So you go out the doors of the gymnasium, you cross over the drop-off pickup loop, and you go down the hill that the kids are sledding on now, and where kids now play soccer, where Park and Rec play soccer, those activities happen. So it's a pretty good walk down the hill to the field where we play, where the kids play for outdoor activities for PE. It's a far distance. So with 1 person, everything got slowed down. So the year without the para, the teacher would have to wait in the hallway by the locker rooms, have the kids change, wait till everybody came out of the locker rooms, and then take them all into the gymnasium for instruction, and then take them outside if they were doing the activity outside. So there was a loss of instructional time. And then reverse everything to come back, have the kids change. Everything took a lot longer. Also, when they were down on the field, the type of activities that the single PE teacher could do with a group of children had to change. And I'll tell you exactly what was not done that had been done in previous years, and then what modifications were made. The other big implication for not having an extra person down there was when we do the mandatory fitness training, the state required fitness tests. So when a teacher is monitoring how a child is doing and recording for purposes of state reporting on fitness, the sit and reach activity, they can only do one student at a time and monitor and record. Curl-ups, they can do 4 students at a time, and push-ups 2 students at a time. So during this time frame when fitness testing was going on, which is annually, the other students had to bring books to read and just be patient and wait while kids were being tested without the help of another person. For the mile run, a whole different story. The 2 teachers made some adjustments to both the health curriculum and the PE curriculum so that 2 adults could be down there and have the 2 classes together, and it took longer. Okay, so that's that. What was eliminated in terms of activities that the kids were doing prior to the cut, floor hockey was not something they were able to teach by themselves, speedball, team handball, because it required a little too much supervision. All at once going on. Baseball, golf, tennis, and rock climbing at the ECC. But on the positive note, there were things lost, units lost, but the teachers did have the opportunity to go to a wonderful conference every year where they picked up new ideas for new units. And so they brought in other type of units that were fun for the kids, taught the skills that they needed to learn for the year, but were just different. So, and again, that was done because they just couldn't see everything at once in the gymnasium by themselves. So year after year, I hope to be able to bring back a PE para so that we can get back to more instructional time and more activities for the kids that they previously had learned.
Thank you, Sue. Jeff?
Welcome.
Sue, how many kids per gym class?
So don't have that off the top of my head, Jeff. It's a good question. Now I think the max is between 35 and 40 students. If I have that, I know I'm in the ballpark. I just don't have the exact amount right now.
Okay, because I remember once upon a time we had 50 students per gym class, and it was a jailbreak. So that was reason back during that time to hire a 3rd PE teacher. So that's why I was wondering what the class sizes look like now, because that should go a long way in our thinking in terms of whether we fund this or not.
Mm-hmm.
Curious. Do they combine? I assume they combine 2 classes. I mean, occasionally I talk to my kids.
So in our school schedule, we have students either going to a music selection or a PE class, and they do that every other day. So it's hard on the fly without a visual to show you the schedule. But so there's kids divided up into 2 different music teachers on any given day, and then the other half of the kids are having PE that day by grade. Okay, so the max we have now, I might be wrong, is about 30 to 35, I believe. Some classes a little bit less, and but mostly around 30. So Jeff, it's not the 50 that you're probably accurately recalling.
Mm-hmm.
It is smaller, but nonetheless, you want to have eyes everywhere when middle school kids are playing a competitive game, for example.
Sure.
Things get hot and heavy pretty fast, or could.
Any additional questions?
It just sounds like a safety concern. I mean, I know there's an academic minute piece. I just, like you're talking, and I'm like having like I'm just nervous. I'm like being in a bill, like when I've taught before, just thinking about kids kind of not, to your point, not having eyes on kids going down hills, like things.
So
what if a kid walks away? Yeah.
Well, I have 2 wonderful PE teachers. They alternate who's down there. Things are slowed down. They're very good. They're experienced teachers. They're keeping the kids safe. But everything has to happen at a little slower pace. You know, when you have two people and you want to go down that big hill, one person stays in the back with the last kid and one leads the charge.
Right.
Things are a little bit different now. But they're staying safe, I assure you. But with a whole different setup.
Good. Any additional questions for Sue? All right, Dr. Harrison. Thank you, Sue.
You're welcome.
You're on mute right now.
Wouldn't be a meeting without it.
Psychedelic.
All right. Can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
So one of the, sorry, let me
Hey,
just.
Rydell, can I ask a favor though? That previous screen showing where it was arguably smaller, but then we could see the things on the right. Can we go back to, or this screen is fine, obviously we can see the whole, but occasionally the video boxes or the picture boxes cover up part of the screen, and maybe it's
Oh, I
just
got
me.
you. Okay. That's better.
Perfect.
Okay.
I can see your whole slide that way. Yeah.
Okay. So the next area that we wanted to talk about was our technology plan, 2225 object 736. And for the sake of this discussion, I'm combining both schools together. So we had some discussion. What we had in proposed increases was an additional 60 Chromebooks and with that, the Google management license, the white glove service, a Chromebook cart for Keller, a charging station specifically for Keller, and between the two schools, 100 iPads. And so the total amount there was 33,670. We talked about the possible recommended reductions, and I'll get to that in a second. But just wanted to give Sue and Kim an opportunity to talk about the current status of the Chromebooks that they have in their building. That was one of the questions, just about what's the number, what's the refresh cycle, what can we expect going forward. And so with that, I'm going to toss it over to Kim, and then I'll come back to this slide.
Hi, I'm going to share my screen. Can you see?
Yes.
So we're currently requesting 30 Chromebooks in the proposed budget. Each Chromebook has a 4-year life period, and we're looking at them as a renewable resource because we need to keep some kind of a cycle going so that we keep replenishing these Chromebooks. So what we currently have at Samuel Staples are 385 viable Chromebooks. But by September 2021, we will lose 70 due to the expired life period, leaving us 315. By June 2022, we're going to lose another 50. We're going to be down to 265. June 2024, we'll lose another 50. We're down to 215. And by June 2026, we'll lose the rest. We average about 20 devices a year that are lost due to damage. The keys are sticking, a student drops it, the cover flies off. But we do anticipate for this academic year, there is a potential that we're going to go higher than 20 devices being lost because of distance learning. We loaned out a substantial number of devices this year, and we've asked the families to keep them at the point. We haven't collected them because we have, in 5th grade, they're actually bringing them to their classes every day. We have still, as you know, 50 odd kids who are learning from home every single day. And some of them have Samuel Staples computers. And then there's a handful of others, because we went back and forth between remote learning and all in, we just want you to keep the device at home so that you're prepared in the event that we need to pivot to remote learning. You might recall that we need the Chromebooks for the Smarter Balanced assessment. And that's given, at least in our building, grades 3 through 5. They do give us a window, but if you were to count the number of students currently in grades 3 through 5, we need 277 Chromebooks if we assess everybody at the same time. If we can't get 277 Chromebooks, then we would need to come up with a rotating testing schedule. We'll give them to 5th grade this week to do math, give them to 4th grade the week after, give them to grade 3 the week after that, and just keep rotating it till we're done with math, and then we start with ELA. But that is the background I wanted to share with you for today.
Kim,
Yes.
how many Chromebooks did you get as part of the COVID relief?
Oh, that's, I want to say 160 something.
Okay. So with that infusion, understanding that down the road, we're going to need more, but we have 160 more that will be on year 2 of their 4-year lifespan. Is it really necessary for 30 more Chromebooks when you got far more than what you would have asked for if COVID didn't happen?
Yeah, and we talked to Dr. Harrison about that at length today. Could we get by with 15? It's definitely moving us in the right direction if we were to reduce our request by 15. But we do think we can't eliminate it altogether.
But okay, maybe I'm not getting the math right here, but if you were able to add 160 to the number that you had prior to COVID, and you're losing about 50 a year due to past the 4-year milestone. I guess I'm having a hard time understanding why you would need any for next year.
Kim, are the new ones including your 311? I think the question is, if you got new Chromebooks, are they included and embedded in that 311 that you started off with?
The total inventory that you described is inclusive of the ones you got this year, correct?
Yeah.
Yes, and that's why in 2024 they'll need to replace all of them because she's already included the 165 in the 311.
If I had to guess at what's going on here, Jeff, I think had we not had the COVID Chromebooks, we would be in very big trouble. I think we were already in trouble, and this just kind of saved us a lot of pain. I think they were already coming off of their life cycle in a way, and probably had been for some years, and we hadn't been investing in that space. And I think we were behind it. I think that's probably what the reality of the situation is.
Yeah, we had a lot of Chromebooks, particularly in May and June. Parents who had them at home were contacted and said they're failing, they're not holding a signal, blah, blah, blah. So we kept swapping them out. And then when the new ones came in, I feel like they came in last week of August, maybe the beginning of September.
Yep.
We started just taking them in and handing out the new ones. So when I say viable, Jeff, there are 385 and some of them are failing.
Is it appropriate to say that some of this demand, Kim, is because of what we've gone through the last 10 months?
Sure.
So, Clarence, would this be an SR2 example?
SR2?
SR2?
SR.
Whatever.
SR, tomato, yes.
Yeah, I'm with Randy.
I thought that was some kind of budget speak.
Yeah, I was.
Yeah. Oh, you guys aren't familiar with SR2s? Okay.
ESSER. Good.
So Randy, this could be a ESSER expense that would fall under one of those 4 categories. So what we are proposing as a reduction is, rather than replacing 30 to cut that in half, replace 15. That will buy us some time. What I'd like to happen for both schools, and really for all 5 schools, once we have our tech director on board to lay out a replacement plan across all 5 schools, that is really clear, that we have a really clear replace and recycle or replenish cycle that makes sense. I think that will also give us a better economy of scale that could potentially drive the price down. So by shaving this all the way back to 15, it cuts it in half, but then also if we don't do any, then we are pushing that that moment down the road where then we'll suddenly have a bunch to replace all at the same time. So you kind of don't want to get in the habit of not having any replenishment happening on an annual basis. I think that we could probably get by with 15 for this year. And Sue can talk about her numbers specifically as far as what she has. But my recommendation in both cases would be to cut that in half.
Okay. I mean, but I hear you. I think that makes sense. Intuitively, it's about 80 or so a year that we need to be replacing, unless we do something different. Right? Because we need 300, give or take. And you have a 4-year. What happens at the end of 4 years? They just don't work anymore, or
They just start failing. They literally just start failing.
Okay.
So Randy, just to give you an
Batteries.
idea, on I think the tri-board meeting, we talked about some outside firms we were going to bring. We have a vendor that will allow us to basically go into every Chromebook, MacBook, laptop, and basically know their when their intro date was in the district. So we can basically get a predictive say, we've got this many machines that are going to be at 4 years in August. So let's start planning. We can be able to start planning ahead and have that data. Because right now we have a device, we can't really tell when we got it. It's just sort of, we bought it, and if the asset tagging wasn't accurate, you don't know, and you sort of wait for it to fail. But this way we can do it remotely, just get the iOS, say, okay, this thing was introduced in 2014, time to pack it up. Or this one came in 2019, that's in the good pile. So that having access to the data will help us make those sort of strategic decisions.
I'll just add to the discussion that when the Chromebooks reach a certain age, they can no longer hold the newer updates, and therefore they can't be used for standardized testing. The secure browser won't function on those devices.
Yeah.
So they can still be used for other purposes, but there is a very definite lifespan to these inexpensive tools.
Sue, do you want to talk us through your numbers, and then
Yes.
then I'll go back to my slide with all of the reductions.
Okay. So everyone stole my thunder between Stephanie and Kim already. So this is the Keller Chromebook. Again, this is the recommendation of our IT person, is Tom Style, is that approximately 20 Chromebooks are lost, same as Kim was describing. At Keller, though, this year we're handing them out to every student at homeroom, and they're carrying them around throughout the day and then putting them back into their the chargers before they leave the school. So that might cause us to have a little more wear and tear, but I feel comfortable with what I'm about to share with you. This is our current inventory. This is the date that the support ends, and as Stephanie described, once support ends, we cannot, our IT people actually cannot update anything on these Chromebooks, so they go into the closet and wait for us to be able to recycle them. So we have 27 expiring on the September. We have 87 expiring the June of 22. 54 of our inventory are expiring the year 2024. And many, Jeff, over here, you asked, we have 191 of our current total inventory of 412 is from the 3 grants that we received this year for COVID. So if John was right, if we hadn't gotten 192 right now, we'd be in pretty rough shape. We're in a nice position this year because we had enough because of these grants to be able to loan out and have one in each classroom for the students to take around throughout the day. So I liked 2 nights ago, the cascading idea. Was it a waterfall or cascade? I forget. But we started with 412. For the next school year, we'll be at 385 because we have to take off these 27. Reduce it next year by 87. We're down to 298. In 2023, we have to take off another 54. And the ones that are the new cycle, the new freshest material, Chromebooks are all gone in the year 25, 26. They're no longer able to be supported and of no use to us for the programs and for the testing that we do. Rydell?
Yep. So, so then what I shared was that the proposed shift would be that we reduce from 60 between the 2 schools, cut that in half at both schools down to 30. And then also what's listed in that same item. So one thing to mention is that we still do want to purchase the cart, the Chromebook cart for at Keller, which is $410, and then a charging station. Given the use that they have throughout the day is a lot more than at the elementary school, and that will help with the charging. So that's at $1,000. What you see as a recommended reduction at both schools is for us to move away from the student iPads. There are still several iPads that will still be in the building, mostly related to SPED services. And so they have that as a separate line in their item. But between the 2 schools, we're looking at $18,400 in iPads. So to reduce those down to 0 and then cut the Chromebooks in half with still keeping the cart and the charging station, that takes us from $33,670 to $8,340. So a net savings of just over $25,000.
Rydell?
Yes.
Does that also mean if we're going to drop the student iPads, that we don't need a new student iPad cart at $9,200, which is in technology equipment 736 on page 3 of Helen Keller Middle School?
That's it, Jeff. That's the student iPads. So it's 90.
Yeah, that's the funky note getting screwed up again. So that is the amount for the iPads, though it says iPad cart.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So it wasn't a cart. I thought to myself, man, that's what got to be one heck of a cart.
Yeah.
And
So
look at it. It's 9,200 times 2 gets you to 18,400.
Yep.
I got you. Thank you.
Is it possible to get a check on where we are with percent increase? And I think my math is saying around 4.16. Is that accurate right now?
If Rydell's willing to let me share my screen prior to this choice, I can show you where we are.
I have 4.162, Devin.
Let's see, share. So I didn't take off that 25,000, but prior to that 25,000, you're 4.24. If I can, I'll do that 25,000 right now, and you'll see a magical change. Rydell, what was that number again? 25 what?
25,330.
Right, one last thing and you will magically see it. Did it not come over? Okay, one last thing to adjust. If my mouse would cooperate, we could do this. Guess it's not cooperating. Oh, you know why?
Filling
Hold
down
on.
the formula. That's weird.
No, it's I know why. Hold on, I got to stop my share for a second.
Okay.
That's why it doesn't want to do it.
I thought about giving Clarence this. We talked about this number. I thought about having him put it in, but I really like the dramatic effect of being able to see that number go down. So I appreciate your patience.
Yep. We do appreciate your patience. 1 second.
This is kind of fun. It's like, okay, so that was what was behind door number 1. Now let's see if
Exactly.
it's door number 2 or door number 3.
Exactly.
We need a little musical accompaniment for when the number changes.
That's right, Jen.
You learn how the sausage is made.
Oh, no, John.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you made a motion and there was a second. Sorry.
One last thing and we're done.
Radell, that little gray computer guy.
Yeah, that's right.
dances.
All right, now I'll share my screen again. Sorry about that, but we get through the technical glitch. Can you all see that now? So you're
Yes.
at 4.09.
Mm.
Pardon my typo, but let me see. It happens when you type quickly.
That's a Harry Potter spell.
So that you're at 4.09 right now with that 25,330.
Okay, keep up the good work. What else?
I was gonna say, can we call it? Are we done? How about what else? do we have to talk about?
No. There's got to be more.
Right, you see what I mean by the negative for the tuition, right?
Yes. Yep.
Oh, that's okay. That's fine. That works.
So the next thing that we just wanted to touch on is about curriculum and instruction, and give Dr. Pearson-Ugel just an opportunity to talk about some of the highlights from there. And I'm going to share my screen, but she'll lead us through these next couple of slides.
Thank you. So on this slide, you can see the priority focus for what's commonly known as summer curriculum work. Ideally, this work occurs in the summer, but it might also occur after school hours, after the contractual day ends. Teachers sometimes find that that's a great time to sort of continue the energy throughout the day. But the focus of my budget proposal in this area is to provide time in the area of science for our middle school STEM teacher to collaborate with his counterpart in Reading and also his counterpart at the high school to develop some foundational components that will create a smoother pathway for students as they move from the middle school to the high school STEM program. And a few days for elementary school science teachers to work with their colleagues in Reading with the facilitation of the Reading Science Technology Instructional Coach. There you can see just a very small amount of time for world language curriculum revisions. And then in math, we see a much higher request. We anticipate that our math specialist, and when I say this is my work in collaboration with the content specialists in both towns, that at the elementary level, there will be some time spent doing analysis of end of the year performance and then adjusting the pacing guides if needed, but also adding additional resources to teachers as they might need to supplement their planned instruction with some extra reinforcement, possibly extra enrichment. At the middle school level, since we are not purchasing a new math program, the middle school teachers in the two towns, the middle school math specialist, will be working with their colleagues to compile a number of supplemental resources, again, to adjust their plan for pacing, their curriculum guide for the year. And the request there is for 5 days. In ILA, this work would likely include any recommendations that we are ready to draft related to diversity, equity, and inclusion to make sure that our reading materials are inclusive of students of all different kinds. And so there's some money directed towards that work. Social studies is the same focus. And again, if during the summer we're ready to do that work, otherwise it would occur during the year in after school hours or the next June in 2022. For library media, I've included just 1 day for our Samuel Steeples library media specialist to have a day of summer work. And my hope is that that would be in collaboration with our technology director. And as you can see, the time of creating this budget, we do not yet know if there will be a Helen Keller library media specialist. So there's no additional funding for the middle school. I've included, so you see 4 days here, but what that really means is 4 teachers for 1 day to work on the interdisciplinary project that occurs in each year of the middle school years. This is really such a critical aspect in that the students take on an inquiry that includes all the core subject areas, and the 6th grade interdisciplinary project was no longer tied to the science curriculum as of a couple of years ago. So it was our hope to be able to revise that last summer. It was modified greatly. And so the implementation of that project was not as it was intended. And so again, our hope is that we could revise that unit of study next summer. So that's looking at really essentially 4 teachers for 1 day. And then the Atlas transition. A number of people have noted that the curriculum links on the ER9 website do not function. They do not function because we ended our subscription with Rubicon Atlas, which is a curriculum software mapping company, basically creates a database of all of our curriculum documents. And we decided well over a year ago that we wanted to internally create Google folders that would hold our curriculum documents. And frankly, this was more of a strategic conversation to improve communication and create a much more dynamic platform for communicating our curriculum, both in terms of content, but also the instructional model, and provide resources for parents and community members. That work should have started last summer, and it was stalled by the pandemic. So we have not yet started that work. We really need to begin that work. So when we receive a request, and I will say that this year we have received more curriculum requests than in my 8.5 years in this position, because of parents making important decisions about their child's education and possibly considering homeschooling. The requests for curriculum need to be filled manually, meaning that someone reaches out to a grade level team or to a content specialist and then compiles the resources for the parent and emails it back to them. There have been a number of questions about the allocation for diversity, equity, and inclusion. I have requested $10,000 for each school to focus on this very, very important work. Some have said that it's hard to understand what we are doing or are not doing in this area. And so what I can say is that it is very hard to know, again, what we are doing or aren't doing if we cannot do a needs assessment in this area. It is so important that we create safe and inclusive environments for our students, for our staff, and for our families. And in order to engage in this work, we need to hire a consultant who's really expert in doing just this type of analysis, to spend time reviewing our curriculum, reviewing perhaps some of the surveys that the DEI task force hopes to create and implement, and then offer guidance for us. Now, that guidance will be considered, not necessarily taken wholesale, but those suggestions will then lead in the curriculum area to draft revisions, which then will, of course, go through the appropriate process through the Easton and Reading Curriculum Committee. In terms of professional development, that consultant will also make recommendations regarding professional development based on the needs assessment. And then we will determine what's appropriate for our staff. So in the other professional services, you can see here that the bulk of the request is for the DEI consultant. Additionally, I would like to continue the literacy consultant work that has occurred at the elementary and middle school. In previous years, this is ongoing professional development to support our teachers in their implementation of the Reader and Writers Workshop model. The Sacred Heart consultant is an individual that we worked with 2 years ago to support our integrated STEM program that exists in Easton and Reading, and also at the high school. And so this individual would facilitate work with our STEM teachers over the summer. So the $2,000 is Easton's share of that collaborative work. And then you can also see a small amount of money directed towards work through CES to continue building our preschool curriculum. The preschool learning standards are still relatively new, and our preschool teachers have engaged in very meaningful professional development with providers through CES over the past 3 years, I would say, at this point. And that work needs to continue. They are not yet done with the work. Teachstone class. Teachstone is the company that provides the teacher evaluation tool. And so we have an ongoing commitment, a requirement, frankly, for all of our evaluators, all of our administrators to recertify. And so we pay Teachstone, that's the company, that's the consulting company, for that recertification process that's quite rigorous. It's probably a full day that our administrators need to engage in every year in order to view videos and code them and be sure that the way that they are evaluating our teachers is consistent and reliable. There are some other products that we also purchase from this company. And because it's all through the company as a consulting, some of this could probably be more accurately described as supplies. But because we pay them as an outside provider, you're seeing the money all in one place. And I think that's the end of yes. So I'd be happy to take any questions about that.
Jeff?
Stephanie, this is on this slide, the second line down, STEM consulting, 1,500 a day for 4 days. Oh, shared across 3 districts. Okay, sorry.
Yes.
So the total, if I got it right, it's $20,000 for the consultant and another $6,480 for the work in ILA and social studies that you pointed out in the first slide. Did I get that right?
Yes, entirely different work. So part of it is professional development and part of it is curriculum writing work. But
It was tied to DEI, if I understood you correctly.
yes, the $10,000 for the consultant in each school and the ILA work and social studies work at Samuel Staples comes to about 6,400. And the work at the middle school is not entirely directed towards DEI work. Some of it has to do with transition work that we do every summer between 8th and 9th grade. So that's not entirely for DEI work.
Okay, so it's going to be somewhere between 26.5 and 30. Ballpark.
That sounds about right without getting out my calculator.
Sure, well, sure. Talked about the this survey and wanting to gather a lot of information. Did we hire a consultant when we started the school climate program, which is about a decade old now? Did we hire someone to come in and help us with questions and help develop the surveys?
Yeah, I'm pausing because it predates my time in this position. So Kim or Sue might be able to answer that question.
Are you thinking about second step?
No, I'm thinking about what Michael and Annie do in terms of their work on school climate. They're the quote school climate administrators, and they do a survey each year. They do it for students. I think they do it for teachers. I'm not clear if they do it for parents as well, but there's a whole series of questions that they gather information for, and at least in Easton, over the past several years, we would ask for a presentation at a board meeting in terms of their findings, because it's obviously valuable that the school climate be the very best it can be. I'm just wondering if we hired a consultant to help us with those questions.
Yeah, it's a fair question. I don't know the answer to that question. I know that some of the questions in the surveys that go to staff, to parents, and to students are given to us by the state.
I can tell you a little bit about that. If I know that the assistant principals in all the buildings you correctly identified are the designated school climate specialists.
Mhm.
They meet together. They took the state pool of questions, and as a team, they created our current school climate survey that's given to all the schools, Jeff. So
Okay.
they fine tune that all the time. And then, so it's done in-house as far as I know.
Okay. Well, a lot of that information that they gather, whether kids feel safe, whether they feel accepted, whether there's an adult that they feel comfortable in going to see, et cetera, in the discussion that I had today with Devin's co-chair for the DEI committee, she wasn't aware that these climate surveys existed, but some of the things that she wanted to gather is a lot of the information that we already have. In fact, we have a decade's worth of it. So I'm just, before we go out and spend money for on a consultant, I wonder if the information is sitting in a file folder someplace that would help us a great deal and understand where our kids are and where our teachers are.
Yeah, there is certainly some overlap. And I know that the DEI task force will be reviewing the school climate surveys. In fact, just today, I shared the 3 current sets of questions for those school climate surveys with
great.
the chair of the task force, so that we're not, we're not doing redundant work. But I don't think that the diversity, equity, and inclusion work is completely covered by the school climate work. I think that we heard from many families towards the end of last year and from many former students in our system that their experience was not entirely inclusive. And some of us were shocked to hear that their experience was painful in some aspects. And I think that it is our responsibility to do a careful review, so that while we may feel as individuals that there are so many things to celebrate, and I do believe there are, we can continue to grow. And so I'm looking for the insight and the expertise of an outside set of eyes to guide us, and hopefully to point out the things that we're doing very well, and then in what direction we might go, so that our staff also can understand how to instruct an increasingly diverse student population, and how to celebrate our differences as well as our similarities, and make sure that all feel included. So there is some overlap with school climate, certainly, but not entirely.
Jeff, this number, I am with you in the sort of shock, I don't want to say shock value, but it's certainly a departure from the amount of money we've spent on professional development and curriculum and instruction work in the past. I am not an expert. Devin can probably speak more to this. The tiny bit that the bit that I've read about it talks a lot about how it's so important that this work is done carefully, and it's done thoughtfully, and it's done by someone who knows what they're doing. Because if you get it wrong, you really get it wrong. It can actually, potentially cause harm that was not intended if it isn't done by somebody who really is an expert in this area. And and our kids are different. Whatever data we have from previous cohorts of students, things have changed tremendously. We've seen, the influx of kids, even just this past year into our district, I would imagine has probably had some impact on a change in demographics. I'm concerned about the finances, but I'm also concerned about what the potential impact is if we don't do it. And then the last thought I have about this is that this is a monumental, broad scope undertaking look, pre-K through 8th grade, and to add an additional burden on our faculty to try to do this work and do it well, and do it in a cohesive way, looking, across the grades and across the disciplines, is just is not a job that I necessarily want them to have to take on.
Thank you, Jenny. Gretchen? Oh, okay. Devin?
So I agree with Jenny. I am fortunate enough to do some of this work professionally, and I can't stress enough how important it is, like what Jenny was saying. If this work is done badly, and I've seen it, I've gone into schools where it has been done very poorly, it is harmful to the school community, to the teachers, to the families, and to the students that are in that community. And this work is about making sure that our community is safe for all learners. It is not about targeting certain groups of people or blaming anyone. It is around creating safe spaces, and really, making sure we're asking as educators questions around when we think about planning a lesson, we start to think about the different communities of kids that we serve and how we can best represent them so that they're able to see themselves in all of the work that we do. And I think it's extremely valuable that we do this work. And I think I wouldn't support this work unless we were doing it with an outside consultant, because of how hard it is to look at yourself and like start to say, what could I do better? That self-awareness is a skill that we have to develop, and having someone come in who is a professional in this work to do this work with us as a community is the right way to do it. And I think I applaud, Dr. Pearson-Ugal and Dr. Harrison for championing this work, and Dr. Ugal for championing it for, since before Dr. Harrison was here, because it is so crucial. And it is something that is being asked for not only by families, but if you've heard some of the stories that students have told, it is shocking, and it is worth greater reflection.
I think my only point was that you have reams of data that have been gathered by Michael and Annie that is certainly worth taking the time to look at, read, and review. And so before, I think my understanding was that our goal here was to do a thorough review, make sure that the things that we do well, that we try to do more of them, and the things that we don't do quite as well, that we do whatever we can to change them and make them better. And so when you have the data that is in our possession but has yet to be reviewed, it's hard for me to sit and say, okay, well, we definitely need to go and hire consultants and do all this extra work. And I know that the information that you'll find from the surveys is very meaningful and very important. And I hope the committee takes the time to look at that.
Is it possible, I know I'm raising an additional work hours in doing this. Is it possible to, first question is, when calendar-wise are we up against the wall to vote as a board and pass the budget and percentage onto the Board of Finance? Does that happen tonight? Does it have to happen?
It does not have to happen tonight, but it can happen tonight, and we can revise and before we send to the Department of Finance. But
do you have a date yet, John? It's generally somewhere between like March 2nd and March 4th.
Yeah, so they were looking at the next week of March, and they were saying that we'd be in a Wednesday. I think they had asked everybody for their times and told us they would schedule us for a Wednesday. So we're either going to be in the Wednesday of that week or the following Wednesday, I think.
Okay.
I was just wondering if it's possible to not necessarily have a consultant come in, obviously, and illustrate that for us, but is there enough just sort of public information or Stephanie, enough expertise in this area to just do sort of a side-by-side comparison for us, or maybe kind of like a crossover look at, what are the typical things that a climate survey looks at versus DEI work? Just, even like a bullet point illustration, just so that, for our purposes and for the public, that we can clearly illustrate that these are two, there is some overlap, but there are also some very important differences.
No, it's a good point. Yes, I could certainly put that together for a future meeting.
Gretchen, did you go ahead?
Yes, that Jenny got at what I was thinking too, because I really do think that I'm sure we have some great data in what we have, but I do think that we need the expert to tell us if we even have the data that we need to assess what we're trying to assess. So I understand Jeff's point. There is validity in looking at what we have, but I'm not sure that even if we did, we'll know if we have all of the right data.
Yeah, and Devin, I'll if just 1 second. So I at my job, I am responsible for the survey committee amongst many other ways of gathering feedback, and surveys are very useful, but they are also limited in what they can tell you, and the degree to which a consultant who is working with our teachers and sort of digging in and sort of coming to understand things with the sort of boots on the ground kind of perspective, that can go well beyond what a survey can do. Devin.
Right, and it's not just survey. I mean, I don't think the committee, but it's not just let's do a survey and then suddenly you have this magical plan. There's also a lot of other data that you're looking at in terms of participation rates by gender, by different demographic groups. You're looking at, are certain students in trouble more often? You're looking at different, which kids are in your advanced classes, which students are not. You're looking at, a whole swath of data. And then you're also probably running some focus groups. And really that's where a consultant should absolutely do that work, because they are professionally trained in doing that work. So I think part of the data collection is also having a professional who does that, because they know what they're doing, versus even a curriculum review is not something that is easy for someone who's taught the curriculum all the time to do, because it's like, oh, I love this curriculum. I've done it over and over again. So of course I'm not going to change it because I love it. So like, what are you looking for in a curriculum review? Those kinds of things. There's again, people are trained to do this work. And if, it's one of those things, in my opinion, you end up starting off on the wrong foot, and you spend a lot of time and money and resources. And whether it's money that we spend to pay a consultant, it's still money that we're spending to pay Dr. Ugal to go do all this research, or one of the teachers to do all this research. And you end up off the wrong foot. And again, I think the community gets the wrong idea of what this work is, and you end up hurting the effort overall to do it correctly.
Right. And I would say at this point, I would not be comfortable charging any of our content specialists to begin to engage in curriculum review and analysis, and then drafting revisions without going through their own professional training first. And they've been very honest in saying they need that PD, and they have engaged to some extent. But certainly they would need to do far more before I could possibly say with confidence that we can take this on internally.
Just go back to what I asked. Please look at the data that we have, and then if you can come back and say, looked at it, there parts A, B, C are great. Definitely want to use those, but what we're missing is X, Y, Z. Then that's fine. Then it would be time to look at how do we get X, Y, Z, and how do we do it in the most efficient way. The work is important. I'm not in any way saying that it isn't. Self-reflection is important, whether it's for you as an individual or whether it's for the organization that you work with. So there's no issue there whatsoever. I'm not running from anything. I'm not hiding from anything, and I don't think we as a board should. But when we have all this and it hasn't been looked at so far, then I ask the question, geez, can we please look at what we have before we charge out and do something else?
Yeah, certainly. And we do analyze those school climate survey results annually, and then do our best to be responsive to the areas of—
Exactly. I know we do.
So I will certainly put together something to better explain what the needs assessment would look like. So as I talked about sort of the different components of this work, the needs assessment, and then the planning, and then the capacity building.
Mm-hmm.
So I can certainly bring back more information.
Perfect. Thank you.
Just a quick couple of thoughts.
Sure.
Firstly, I'm going to make an assumption, and I'll, after I finish my second thought, Sue and Kim can jump in. But my assumption is, given that we've been collecting the data that Jeff's talking about for 10 plus years, that Sue and Kim have looked at it. They look at it every year, and they act on it. They don't just, so they've been acting on this for 10 years plus that we've been collecting this data. My second comment is, in my experience, Dr. Josephberg, Dr. McMorrin, now Dr. Harrison, unfortunately, is going to hear this, but we have shortchanged ourselves and Stephanie and the curriculum area in our district since I've been on the board. And every year, we get down to that, $500, and we're taking it out of this and we're taking it out of that to try and meet a number that we're given to by the Board of Finance. And now this year, and honestly, this is the first year and maybe I missed it in the last couple of years, that DEI has been a topic, and we are going, and maybe we should be, I don't know yet, but we're going headlong into this and more than doubling our curriculum budget for an item that's never been brought in front of the board, in my experience of 7 years here. And that might be the right answer, but it doesn't feel like to me that we know. And I hate to use this expression, but is it a hammer looking for a nail, or have we missed the boat the last 5 years and now we're catching up?
So every school needs to do this work. I mean, I can't speak to the last 5 years. I wasn't on the board. I completely agree with you, Randy. We have shortchanged curriculum PD pretty drastically.
And we're doing it again.
I think it's really,
and we're doing
it again. But this is the work. Diversity, equity, and inclusion work is key to educators being good at what they do. It is key to making sure every student in our district feels safe and included and learns. So it is crucial. It's a crucial aspect to what we do. I'm not sure why we haven't had that focus on that work before. And I think the community that we have has done a lot of things. So I know in the elementary school, for example, they brought in restorative practices. That is actually a key component of DEI, because you're looking at how you discipline students and making sure it's fair and equitable. I know that there's been a lot of training, and I can speak to this because my kids are little, around gender pronouns and thinking very inclusively about the LGBTQ plus community. So to say that this work isn't happening isn't true. It has happened more on these one-off basis, and now being able to do it as a system makes that, and I know that Ms. Kaplan does it as well. I just don't have kids in the middle school, because I know you've done great things with bringing in speakers for parents to talk about very touchy topics and social media. I think it just we haven't focused on it at the district level, which allows every student across, like, vertically to really benefit. And just because we haven't done something isn't a good reason, in my opinion, not to do it. But
well, I guess
I would say,
now my one last comment. I think we're making assumptions here. We're making broad brush statements without knowing whether that's accurate or not. You're saying we're doing it or we're not doing it, because you said both. You said Kim is doing it because you've seen it, because your kids are in that school. You assume Sue is doing it, but you're not there. Your kids aren't there. We are doing it, or we aren't, but it feels like we are. And I was one of the folks that reached out to Stephanie and said, you know, can we have data on where we are today, what we're doing, what's our baseline? And you can certainly work in the data that we've collected over the last 10 plus years in the schools on how kids feel and whatever. And then it feels like ready, shoot, aim a little bit. And maybe it's not. Maybe
actually, but the first step in this process is a data collection process. And part of that is having a consultant come in to do that work, which is the ask, which is, like, again, there are pockets of this work happening for sure. What I understand Dr. Pearson-Ugal is working to bring into our community is a trained consultant who will work with a committee to look at the data that we already have. Some of that is the climate surveys from the past 10 years, but also a large collection of student data that really gives an understanding of how different groups of students are performing, also engage in some focus groups, and then from there create a plan to also train teachers in things like cultural competence, implicit biases, and how to, continue to create inclusive practices within their school communities. Yes, of course, like anybody who works in education is doing things to make sure that their schools are safe and inclusive. That is our goal as educators. But now there's a focus to make sure there's a shift in the last few years to really focus on cultural competence and recognizing that as educators, you bring in a set of biases from your own upbringing. We all have bias, right? And how that bias could potentially impact your behavior as an educator, both in good ways that could help benefit kids, but also in ways that you could potentially unintentionally negatively impact certain students. So it allows you now to, again, reflect, like Jeff was saying, on how to improve your practice. And that is a shift in the last few years in how we work in classrooms. And that, I believe, is what some of the work that Dr. Pearson-Ugal is bringing into the community.
So I'll say also just that I am not looking to pay someone a large sum of money to create surveys, administer surveys, and look at the results. As Jeff said very clearly, we have some good information, and we will absolutely make use of the information that we have through the school climate surveys, and then also the information that will be gathered through the task force. I am hoping to focus more on the data analysis that might be akin to more of the work that Devin just described, doing an analysis of our students' performance that's disaggregated by different groups. And certainly that information can be made available. And this is a discussion that we're really having pre-K through 12. So it's not just for Easton. It's embracing this work as an entire system. And the efficiency piece of it is that I would look to hire a consultant and attempt to do work that's shared across districts, so that when feasible, we could bring groups together, teachers, other staff members across district, and then you're not paying for a separate session. I want to go back to that we haven't seen this be a real focus and request in the past. Each year when we go through this budgeting process, you very accurately described how PD is often drawn down, or sometimes it never even makes it to the public stage, because this is simply not something that we fund generously, I would say, in our budgets, in my experience in ER9. So by the time you see the budget request from my office, it has already been prioritized. So earlier today, Dr. Harrison was given a spreadsheet that shows my planning for how I would like to use the requested funds. And he said, I'm not really clear about this whole column here on the left. There aren't any dollars attached to it. Well, because that's a list of all of the things that over the last several years that I might have prioritized as a focus, but are not being prioritized this year. And so there are some years where it's a real focus on math. You might remember years where there was a real focus on the World Language Department and creating our elementary FLES Spanish program. We hired a world language consultant. That's not a priority this year. And so I'll go so far as to say, and I know this is coming anyway, I will reduce in other areas in order to make this the priority, because I feel that strongly about it.
Can I pop back in for a second? Randy, I just, the part that struck me about what you were saying was the idea of a baseline. And Stephanie, please correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, the impression that I get, although, and again, to me, it does appear expensive, but that this is the baseline, right? That this person is, the idea is that this expert comes in and analyzes our program like soup to nuts and gives us that baseline and says, this curriculum, great, leave it alone. This part of your curriculum needs work. Here are some resources, here are some suggestions, and can help us develop a plan for professional development, can help us develop a plan for, hopefully, like in a very cost-effective manner, taking what's already in existence and either enhancing it or adding, adding parts to the program. But that the alternative is that we internally, with our existing staff and existing resources, attempt to figure out where that baseline is for ourselves. And I see that as sort of a process of kind of poking around in the dark, hoping we get it right, but with, and layering that on top of already demanding workloads. So to me, what I'm hearing is that we need to bring this person in to look at everything. Again, like she said, not to just give surveys, but to, to go into classrooms and to really kind of walk through and just look at everything and give us a really clear, honest picture about what needs to be done. And in my mind, this is Yes, it's a, we have different trends in education, but DEI work to me is also kind of like a crisis. I feel like we've reached a point of crisis in this area, locally and at the state level and nationally. And that part of this is in response to that. And part of it is in response to a changing population in Reading and Easton.
Thank you, Jenny.
You know,
Randy.
to just add to this, at the first DEI task force meeting that happened earlier this year, actually shortly after I got here, one of the things that we talked about was developing a diversity, equity, and inclusion framework that would sort of sit and guide the work. And it's really three simple steps. The first is with everything related to diversity, equity, and inclusion, to review our assets and our challenges. The second is to develop a theory of action. What do we believe is the way to kind of chart a path forward, and then develop and implement a plan. And so I think everything that we're talking about tonight is really focused on that first step around reviewing the assets and challenges, and then having the skill set to develop that theory of action and a plan, and building capacity to do that. I think that when I first started and was meeting teachers, I think our teachers have all been really excited about building on some of the individual work that many of them have done, just talking about different books that they've read and just their own personal professional growth, but to really come at this and lay out a plan from a systemic level. I think it's really going to get us the bang for our buck, and what the consulting support does is that it brings in the outside voice and expertise, and really guides the work forward. I think that it would be a disservice to the students and to the teachers in the community for us to be still trying to figure it out a year and a half from now, because we didn't front load the resources in an effective way. There's sort of a way that this works, so we're not having to chart this course ourselves as a district, with other districts haven't already done this, and so we are very much what the plan that Stephanie is proposing is very much in line with what we've seen around us from districts that have worked. And the closest example actually is in Region 9, where they they were able to set aside money for this current school year's budget. They are working with a consultant and sort of really moving this work forward in the same kind of focused direction that we would like to see across all three districts. So there is a good model for success. I think that it would be an investment well spent.
Dr. Harrison, who's the consultant that's working with Region 9?
Region 9 is working with two consultants from the Center for School Change. And if you hadn't asked me to say their names off the top of my head, Carrie
Lord and Patrice.
Carrie Lord.
Patrice.
Mm-hmm.
That's a first name or a last name?
That's her first name.
It's just her name. She's like Madonna.
So they are two of several consultants at Center for School Change, and Center for School Change does consulting work around a number of areas. Equity happens to be one of them, and they've actually worked with a number of districts across the state, and have gotten really far. We, as part of the Region 9 process, we looked at a number of consultants Dr. McMorrin and Dr. Pearson-Yulgo had started that work prior to me getting here. And then I was able to sort of pick up where they left off. And we looked at a number of consultants. And for the work that we saw being the best next steps for Region 9, Center for School Change, it really made a lot of sense. We've been able to benefit from their work beyond just Region 9, just being able to work with those consultants and get some sort of free guidance on what makes the most sense as we're thinking about Easton and Reading as well.
Will you happen to know, or maybe Clarence does, what their budget line item for just the consultants was at Region 9?
Just over 45, just around $45,000.
Okay. And that's just the consultants. There's nothing else in that. Yeah. Okay.
And didn't part of that money go to Dr. Daniel Barrett from Westcon?
No.
He was free.
Yeah, he was gratis. The entire amount has been towards the Center for School Change. There was some additional curriculum money that was put aside for this work, but the allocation, this sort of special allocation that the board made with unspent funds late last year was directed toward this consulting.
Well, I think it's probably fair to say that if these folks work for the Center for School Change, that that their bias, I mean, if we all have bias, then certainly they would too, would be that that they're coming into this assuming that there's something wrong. Would that be fair?
No, and that's not what I've seen. I can only speak from my own experience. I participate with the high school leadership group in this work. So I've attended all of the sessions with the small leadership team that includes students, parents, staff members, and administrators. And the activities that we are engaged in are really interesting, thought-provoking activities to consider our experiences in everyday life in different perspectives and the way different groups feel included or excluded. But each individual is able to draw their own conclusions. The presentations are not of the nature where someone is presenting and telling. It's just more around a question prompt or studying a newspaper article and having a conversation about it. So that has not been my experience. And I would say, as Dr. Harrison noted, Dr. McMorrin and I interviewed probably 10 different consultants, either over the phone or Zoom or in person before ultimately selecting the center.
Any additional questions for Stephanie? Okay, Dr. Harrison.
The last item on the list was just about utilities, and Clarence was going to finish up tonight with us clarifying the line item about electricity.
Well, Randy, I have bad news and I have bad news. Typically, like I told you, Randy, I like to have some sort of projection, but when you don't have projections, you sort of base it off actuals. So right now we're running at a projected deficit of around $29,000 in electricity. That's why you see the $25,000 budgeted for next year. If you ask me my theory behind that deficit, having walked around Helen Keller and seen all the portable air conditioners and fans plugged in every room that have been running nonstop, I could see why an electricity bill would be exceeding the budget. So at one point in the summer, you had portable air conditioners. When it got cold, those got switched to portable fans, and they run constantly. We're also running our building ventilation systems 24/7. All that requires juice. So we're, like I said, we're at 28.9 thousand right now, projected in the red in electricity. So for budgeting purposes, we allocate an additional 25. Now, some of that may be just permanently COVID related, but something I have a feeling, particularly at Helen Keller, that may be a sort of a permanent thing based on what the staff's concerns have been expressed to me, at least to me, through Susan. So that's why we budgeted an additional 25 because of where we're trending right now.
Okay, and the new solar field that really came on at the end of the last fiscal year, there's nothing to gain from that?
I just got some data from them. I had a meeting with them today. So they just sent me some numbers today. I think that's more of a cost avoidance because Samuel Staples may have been higher, but for that, but I haven't had a chance to read those numbers. That literally came around 2 o'clock this afternoon, their numbers. I asked them to sort of proof their, send me data to proof their concept because they're actually looking to do some more projects here in town. So before I sign up for that, I want to see how successful they've been. But I think the issue we have is, like I say, with literally, I don't know if you guys, I wasn't here for it, but you all spend a lot of money buying portable air conditioners that are been plugged in, and now there's portable fans and they're running all day long. And then the ventilation system in the schools are running on to get the refresh the air. And that's all COVID related. Whether that continues on, don't know, but to be conservative, we budgeted an additional 25, even though we're about 29 in the red right now.
Okay. So I don't think from the book that you dropped off, I don't think I can tell by school what the year prior was. I mean, cost avoidance means cost went down at Staples. So from the panels, presumably. But maybe the consultants or the guys that installed these things can help us understand what the electricity at Staples is doing. Because honestly, by the time both of these fields were to be in, our electricity costs were supposed to be nominal. As a matter of fact, we were supposed to be selling it back to town hall, which, you know, if candies and nuts and everything else. But I take your point at Helen Keller. You know, I'm sure there's incremental usage there, but it's hard to, and I know the systems aren't allowing it, but it's hard to compare year over year. All we can kind of tell is there's a $25,000 increase, but
and that 25,000 was a decision we made based on the current trend to make sure we have enough for next year. It's simply based on the trend that we're experiencing right now.
Yeah. Okay. So there's nothing there is the short version.
Like I said, I got double bad news for you. So that there's nothing there.
Yeah.
Devin?
So if there's no more cuts, I'd like to call the question to, how would I do this, to accept the budget?
We didn't actually start with the motion. So yeah, if you wanted to make a motion.
I can make a motion to accept the budget at an increase of 4.09%. Is that right, Clarence?
As of right now, yes.
Do I have a second? Gretchen, thank you. Discussion.
I just wanted to know kind of where, I mean, also keeping an eye on the time, given our recent track record of meetings, that I want to kind of
time flies when you're having fun.
My word about time concern, and have us kind of take stock of the rest of the evening now before it's, you know, midnight and we're wondering what's going on.
Right.
Just as far as the slides and the kind of buckets that folks were going to go through, you know, that's been taken off the screen. So I just didn't know if we were at the end of that or if there were more things coming to discuss, and just kind of like an open question to, you know, other board members if they had other things that they were looking to possibly reduce or talk about.
I had a handful of small things, but I'll turn it over to anybody else.
Well, I've got a couple as well, but Randy, if you want to shoot first, that's fine.
Very quickly, there was an outside substitute nurse that looked like it was an increase of 3,500, and I don't need an answer tonight, but it's just, I'll throw it on the table, Clarence, if you get a chance or whatever. From junior,
you know which building it was in?
HKMS. The junior bridges program. My understanding is we have some students from outside the district coming into our district, and therefore providing revenue, if you will. do we have a number? Do we have a number of students that includes and a revenue number on that?
Randy, I'm pretty positive that that number in this current school year is 1. And I think that what we're anticipating in next school year is that that number would be 0. So there would be no generated revenue from that student from the outside.
Okay. And then cafeteria headcount, I think at Helen Keller is the same. Is that right, Sue? From year over year, there's no change there, or is there?
No change.
Okay. We're working on the Hanson report. Homebound tutoring went from 2 to 4,000. I'm guessing that's not a guess. That's sort of a known quantity. That was SSES.
That was an estimate based on Jen's review of how that money was spent this year. I can have further conversation with her.
Randy, it sounds like a mark to market. They basically is probably spending more than $2,000, so they're trying to, accommodate for it next year.
Okay, and that was, sure, that makes sense. My assumption, I just wondered if she was, sort of guesstimating at it or was highly confident, that's all. So I think that's everything I have.
Thank you, Randy.
Okay, I'm sorry, I just assumed I was next.
Yeah, you are, unless anybody else had their hand up before, which I don't think is the case.
Helen Keller, 431. I asked Clarence last time if we could have a update on what our expenses have been in cleaning and repair. I know for next year it has dropped from the 56,000 down to 46,000, but just looking at the numbers that have been added, and there's about 20 different line items here, maybe more, I'm just guessing, but they're all clearly the numbers are all placeholders. And I wonder if, when I look at the Staples number, it's 13,000, and is there an opportunity here to drop from 46 down another $15,000 or $20,000, because these are guesstimates unless we've got actual numbers that show that this is stuff that we are spending across the board.
So Jeff, for 431, this is on a combined basis. I can't really give you the schools broken out. We budgeted 124,649. Year to date, as of February 7th, we spent just shy of $70,000. So you're over 50%, essentially halfway through the year. We got a remaining balance around 54,000. And today I went to both schools, and before leaving both schools, each head custodian gave me a quote for an $8,000 piece of equipment and repair they needed immediately. So $16,000 just went out the door today.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say that you should please not touch that.
Okay. Moving to Samuel Staples, 114 other payments certified. Last year it was 88,234. This year it's 97,552. That's a solid 10% increase. And looking through the list, I don't see that anything new has been added. So why would it go up? In essence, $9,000.
Jeff, can you give me a function code, please?
114.
114, and what was the object code?
1100.
I think you just flipped them. You mean function 1100 and object 114?
Object 114. Right.
Okay, yeah, for a second. I don't have an. Okay, hold on one second. And you said Samuel Staples?
Right.
It starts with District Mentor and ends with Webmaster.
Webmaster.
Well, you've gone up 10 grand. So I'm gonna see what the change is. You've got 40. You got the dual certification. Only thing I can think, I don't know, I have to check with Vicky to see what the particular increase is. It could just be all contractual, Jeff. I have to confirm that with Vicky, but it could just be all contractual. I
Well,
don't see anything new on here. It doesn't, there's no indication of anything being new, so I'd have to go into
yeah,
detail.
well, there's certainly a possibility that the longevity has gone up. But after that, it's pretty all that stuff is pretty standard. So I would be surprised at that.
Could it be longevity plus stipend increases, contractual stipend increases?
It could be. Like I said, I'd have to sort of
Oh,
drill down with Vicky.
the stipend increases that we had were really contractually pretty small.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
And then, this page shows up again, but it's in a different spot. Okay. I'm sorry, I'm talking to myself, excuse me. And I think that's it.
No problem, Mr. Topstack.
Jeff, I just wanted to go back and answer your earlier question about the students in the Junior Bridges program. So Reading students in the Easton, there are actually 2 students currently enrolled in that, or maybe Randy, that was your question, in that Junior Bridges program. But we are anticipating both students to go back to Reading. Yes, to go back to Reading next year, under the assumption that their budget passes and approves and is approved, because they are building out their Junior Bridges program there.
Okay. What kind of revenue was that for us for this year?
I don't have that number off the top of my head.
Iris is looking it up.
No, I was looking and I have information about our cost share for staff, but not for that particular student. So I don't have it at the tip of my finger.
Okay.
Does it make sense? Well, I mean, this is not a conversation, I guess, for tonight, maybe a tri-board meeting. Does it make sense for both regions to have the same program? I guess
based on your structure, Randy, with the grade structure, it does. There's a hole. You all have a hole and they have a hole. So it's actually very symbiotic. So they can send you kids and you can send them kids because there's certain age, since your programs are at different grade levels, this actually works out very well.
Right.
If you were one district, it wouldn't be a problem. You just do it, but you're not one district. So you got to form sort of a symbiotic relationship here.
Okay, I didn't realize the grade differential. Okay. I mean, I know their middle school includes fifth, but I didn't realize the Junior Bridges was grade level, and that's the distinction. But okay.
I would also throw one more thing out. We have done a capital improvement of asbestos remediation for the locker room that is required by 2025. I would hope that that's something that we could do this year. Not spend the 4,500 next year, but spend the 40.
Randy, can you give me a school?
It's 3.
I'm sorry, that's Helen Keller. It's on page 4. It's under capital improvements, 450.
Rand, I asked because we may have already taken it out, so that's why I'm asking.
Okay.
Helen Keller.
I don't think I saw it on the scoreboard, but
I'm sorry. Which one are you looking at, Jeff? There's
J, asbestos remediation locker room.
I see it now.
Under capital.
Yes, sir.
Yes, it is. Hold up. Under 450.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, it's already out. So if on the scoreboard, it's embedded in that number that says reduction in capital request.
Yeah.
Okay.
Only thing I left $5,004 for the wall safety padding in the gymnasium.
Okay. Well, I would hope we can do the remediation this year. It needs to be done. It's nothing to fool around with. So I'd rather do it sooner than later.
Hey, John, just one other thing, and just to bring us home, so to speak here. I mean, we're looking at a $750,000 increase, give or take. We know that Barlow is going to flip to us to the tune of 800,000 or what have you. So
649,000.
Okay, so you're looking at 1,300,000, 1,400,000, and that's probably close to $1,000 a household in Easton, maybe just under that. And 2/3 of those households don't have any kids in school. You know, and so I think we just all need to be mindful of that. I know we're not going to end up, you know, probably unfortunately and fortunately on the same token at 4.09, but it's a huge number for a large percentage of the population in Easton to absorb. So anyways, so take it over.
Yeah, thank you. If there's no further discussion, we'll call the question. All right. Very good. Sorry, I'll go start down here. Gretchen? Yes? Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. Devin?
Yes.
Thank you. Randy?
Yes.
Thank you. Jenny? Yes. Thank you. Jeff?
Yes.
Thank you, Jenny. And Jeff? Jeff is saying yes.
It's not with a smile on my face though, but yeah.
Understood. And I vote yes as well. The budget passes 6-0. Very good. So the next step will be that we'll take this to the Board of Finance. That takes us next to, sorry, I actually forgot the order. Apologies.
Public comment.
Thank
Public comment, maybe? Yeah.
Public comment and then board member comment. That takes us to public comment. Thank you. We'll just look for anybody's hands raised or anyone who turns on their video and waves at us. No.
Does
Okay.
somebody look in the waiting room, John? Is that right?
Yes, I see that. But I didn't get a pop-up on my screen. Did anybody get a pop-up on their screen?
I just did a second ago and
A
I
second ago.
Oh,
minute.
okay. I didn't see it. Sorry.
She's in.
Okay.
that's
All
okay.
right. Let's, I just want to make sure it's possible that she was watching on YouTube and sort of saw that we were wrapping up and wanted to come in for public comment. So I just want to give her a chance to get her audio connected if that's, if that's the intent. Okay. Good. Okay. All right. So then board member comment. No one?
No. Thanks everybody for
Thank you very much. Look for a motion to adjourn.
so moved.
Thank you, Randy.
Second.
Thank you, Jeff. All in favor? Very good. We are adjourned at 10:22 p.m. Thank you very much,
Thanks,
everyone.
everybody.